Thank you for coming this evening for the Budget Town Hall. I'll do some introductions real quick. We got Fire Chief McCoy, Jennifer Carey, Travis Hopkins, City Manager, City Clerk Lisa-Lane Barnes, David Cain, the Acting Budget Finance CFO. We got Butch Twining, Councilman Casey McKeon, Mayor Pro Tem, and I'm Pat Burns, current mayor of Huntington Beach, councilperson. All right, we're going to go over, we're going to stick to budget items and hopefully educate a whole lot of people on what our current status is, at least an overview. And right now, I'll turn it over to Casey McKeon.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. The reason why we wanted to do this is we want to be as transparent as possible and bring you guys into the room with us. When we first got elected, it was challenging because right away we were faced with like a budget deficit that we had to solve in those first 6 months. And ever since then, these last 2 years, it's always kind of like whack-a-mole, like trying to get ahead of it. And we realize how important of an issue it is, and we need to tackle this together as a community. So it was our idea to have these town halls, and then over the next, I think, 7 council meetings, we'll have a section of every meeting dedicated to the budget to bring you guys into the room with us. To solve this as a community, it's very complex. It's a huge budget, obviously $350 million, and we want to walk you guys through it, ask you for your input, suggestions you have. The main issue is that our structural budget has challenges in that our reoccurring expenses exceed our reoccurring revenues. So we get a lot of one-time funds. As an example, Attorney Gates last year brought in $38 million through the redevelopment agency lawsuit. So that's one-time money. If you remember that last meeting, the finance department mentioned that we could actually use those proceeds to get us through this budget shortfall. We don't think that's a really good use of funds. We think there's a better way to go about it. We always think there's ways to create efficiencies. There's always ways to bring in more revenue and then save those monies if we want projects that we think are big as a community. One example is maybe like an upgrade to Main Street, some things like that. So we wanted to have as many opportunities for you guys to have input and see the challenges that we are facing. I'm confident we'll get through it, but it's important for you guys to be involved in this process. And so again, we want to be as transparent as possible, involve you in the discussions, and then get input from you to see if we can find results that get us to the promised land and have a good, strong financial future for generations to come. So thank you. And then next up is our new elected clerk, Lisa-Lane Barnes, and she wanted to give a mini presentation.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Excellent. I am Lisa-Lane Barnes, your newly elected city clerk, and I am delighted to be here today. I wanted to come and share the progress we've made in the first 90 days of my tenure as your city clerk. However, before I begin outlining some of the accomplishments that we've had in our office, I want to take a moment to recognize the dedication and hard work of my incredible office staff. The city clerk's office operates with an impressive level of activity, efficiently managing a diverse array of responsibilities. My staff work long hours providing exceptional service not only to our internal departments, but also to our community. The remarkable attention to detail ensures that everything runs smoothly, but most importantly, they genuinely care about the city, and I am truly grateful for their unwavering support and commitment. And with me here tonight is Donna Switzer, our senior deputy clerk, and she handles more than I can even detail here in the hour that we have available. So before we begin, I just want to give you a high-level overview of what the city clerk's office takes care of on a regular basis. So we are the legislative administrator. We attend all of the city, you can't, yes? Can't see it. Okay. There we go. All right, so I'm going to step over here. So we attend all the city council meetings and oversee the agenda, the management system. We execute the contracts, we codify the ordinances, record city agreements. There's a lot of detail to that work that is handled by my staff and myself to make sure that everything from the city council meeting is executed. As you know, we manage all the elections. We process all the candidates for elective office. We provide public notifications. And my assistant deputy clerk is the FPPC coordinator. So if you have any questions, if you're an elected official, you can reach out to Juan Esquivel. We also have our records management, and we have a decentralized or a centralized records management system, and we have recommitted to making sure that we are accurately recording the legislative history of our city. We manage all of our public requests, and we are the passport acceptance office. So if you need a passport, please come by our office and get your passport renewed. And we also have a historical vault that houses many pictures and information of historical value. So in summary, the city clerk is the backbone of the local government operations. We're ensuring transparency, efficiency, and legal compliance while fostering public trust and engagement. The role is vital for maintaining the integrity and effectiveness of municipal government. And here's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me. And if I can get the lights back on. Marty, can you turn the lights back on? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So with that, I'd like to continue on with the accomplishments that have taken place in the city clerk's office. First, we've made significant strides in streamlining our agenda and our public meeting processes. By consolidating these processes, I've improved staff efficiency, making it easier for them to prepare the agendas and transcribe meeting minutes. This ensures a high level of operational efficiency and a smooth running office. Next, we have fostered a strong relationship with our information systems department. Together, we've enhanced our existing software programs, ensuring that technological tools are up to date and meet the needs of our staff. This collaboration helps us work more efficiently and effectively. Third, by adjusting staffing hours, I've optimized the passport processing and customer service. This change has reduced wait times, overall experience for citizens seeking passport services. Your time is valuable, and I am committed to continue making the processes more efficient. Fourth, we are analyzing new legislation, and that has been a key priority. By proactively assessing laws that could impact our city, we ensure that we remain compliant with all legal requirements. Fifth, we have renewed our focus on records management, and accurate maintenance, preservation, and accessibility of official records are crucial for transparency, legal compliance, and good governance. Proper records management ensures our city's legislative history is preserved for generations. Next, I've had productive discussions with our police department and our fire department to enhance coordination and collaboration. By reviewing best practices, we've worked together to improve our office operations and staff support. This collaboration fosters more efficient and more supportive work environment for everyone. And lastly, I'm excited about our partnership with the Arts Center. We are going to feature artwork from local artists on a feature wall in the clerk's office. This initiative not only enriches the experiences for citizens visiting the clerk's office, but also highlights rich artistic talent within our community. Local artists can now showcase their work at the clerk's office. And these are the accomplishments that we have done in the first 90 days of office. These accomplishments reflect my commitment and operational efficiency, high-performing organization, servicing with transparency, integrity, and innovation. Thank you for your time.
All right, good evening. I am David Cain, the Interim CFO for the City of Huntington Beach. And I wanted to, this evening, spend a little bit of time giving you a high-level overview. One of the things that drives our organization that we'll be talking about throughout the evening is the fact that we have a strategic plan in place. This document was put together back in 1923, let me try that again, 2023, with city council, city staff, and community members. And it identified 8 key priorities in the community. And one of those priorities is this priority that's sitting up on the slide is fiscal stability. And it talks about the concept of ensuring that we have available funds necessary to be able to support all of the essential city services that we have in our community, including capital investments, and also the idea of building a surplus over time. So one of the strategies behind this that was identified again in that strategic plan was also the opportunity to look at, are there opportunities for new or enhanced revenue sources, looking at various initiatives in terms of efficiency and effectiveness throughout our organization. But we're faced with a budget challenge at this point. As we have indicated over the last several years, each year we've had a budget challenge. And so I want to bring you up to speed and kind of explain to you where we're at this evening. We have been able to balance the budget in the last few years by reducing costs, being more efficient in what we're doing. But as we began to put our long-range plan together and update it, we've had a long-range plan for a good number of years. It's been an excellent document. But as I will be sharing with you here momentarily, we have gone to a different platform that gives us some greater flexibility in being able to look at the data. It's very data-driven, look at it based on economic indicators out there, and then being able to run based on a baseline what-if scenarios on a go-forward basis. So that projection at this point in time identifies that we're going to be in a structural deficit. That means that our ongoing revenues do not meet our ongoing expenditures, and I'll explain why some of those things are happening in our organization. But if we're in a position of doing nothing over the next 7 years, that cumulative deficit goes to about $50 million. So we really need to begin to address that challenge today. So as we look at one of the things that we have in our organization is we have a good number of finance policies as well as budget policies in place that have been vetted and approved by City Council. And in those budget policies is the fact that ongoing revenue must meet ongoing expenditures. That policy indicates that no one-time revenues can be used to balance the budget. We do use one-time revenues to build up other reserve funds to be able to do one-time projects, but we don't utilize and cannot, based on the city policy, utilize that to balance the budget. That's a structural. We need to identify ongoing revenue that meets those ongoing expenditures. So this next chart is a graphical representation of our enhanced long-range financial plan. And what we have in this plan is we have 10 years of audited financial data, including all of our revenues and our expenditures for our general fund. So you'll notice a dashed line down the middle, and so everything to the left of that is history, how we actually landed in each fiscal year based on that audited financial statement. That dashed line is what we call our baseline, and that baseline at this point in time is the current adopted budget that we have for the current fiscal year. And then everything to the right is a projection of the next 10 years based on economic data. So we utilize Moody's Analytics, and there are several other tools that we use with the firm that provided us with this particular document. So unlike some of the Excel spreadsheets where we, in the past, would go out into the future years and try and estimate different revenue and expenditure line items. We don't need to do that anymore because we're looking at it from what that economic data is providing to us. And so as this indicates, over the next 7 years, that's going to be a structural deficit. As we go out into the final 3 years, that does show a surplus. However, one of the things that I want to note here is, again, if we don't address this particular issue, is that cash position is actually going to roll into those final 3 years out there because you've gone through all of your cash that's available in the organization. So one of the things that we live in today's world is the reality that in California, we're in a unique situation because of Prop 13, approved by the voters. But in reality, what it did is it limited that property tax to 1% with a 2% annual growth. And so it's protected us. It's done what it needs to do. But one of the other things that happened after Prop 13, and many people don't realize this, is after that property tax dollar was divvied up between the entities in that particular geographical area, let's say the city of Huntington Beach, in the early 90s, the state of California couldn't balance its budget. And so it came along and said, hey, wait a minute, we need to be able to balance our budget. We've got a structural deficit too. And so they came in the early 90s and took part of the $1 that we had been splitting amongst a variety of agencies. So many people don't realize that that was not a one-time takeaway, but that was a permanent takeaway. They also, over several courses, several years, also came in and took one-time money away from us, over $7 billion. They also went into redevelopment money, pulled that away from us also. And so we're limited in terms of the fact that that dollar even became smaller in the 90s because of what we call the ERAF takeaway. Our sales tax share, everybody pays 7.25%, but the reality is, keeping in mind that the city of Huntington Beach gets 1% of that sales tax dollar. The rest of it, as you can see here, the majority of it is going back to the state of California, almost 4% of that. There is a 0.5% sales tax measure that was approved by the voters, Proposition 172. And so that 0.5 cent does come back into the local community, including the city of Huntington Beach, based on a pro rata share throughout the state of California. So that money does come back in. It can only be used for public safety. It can't be used for any other purpose. You will also see a 0.5 cent Orange County Transportation, so OCTA, got voter approval to do a 0.5 cent sales tax. That's part of that 7.75%. That money you will see most recently being utilized to widen the 405 freeway. So that's where a large chunk of that money came from to be able to do that particular project. On the right side is the $1 property tax. And you'll notice that this is split with the elementary school district, who gets about 22 cents on the dollar. Our high school gets about 22 cents on the dollar. But what's most significant is that red box right there. That is the state takeaway, that ERAF that they took away starting in the 90s. And that is looking at 16.5 cents. It is actually more and is a larger takeaway than the city's portion, which is just under 16 cents, which is in that gray box as the next line down. So when you pay your property tax, one of the things you need to recognize is when you pay that dollar, the city is getting a little bit less than 16 cents on that dollar. That's how the property tax is divided both under Prop 13 as well as the ERAF takeaway. So what I wanted to do is also indicate to you what are some of the driving factors to our budget expenditure side of this equation. So a lot of these are expenditures that we do not have any control over. all of us are facing the fact that we have inflationary construction costs, our material costs, our equipment, our vehicles, all of those types of things that we utilize to provide the essential services to this community have risen dramatically over the last few years. We also continue to have state mandated requirements coming down from the state of California. Many of those are not reimbursed. Way back in the day, we used to get reimbursements on those. There's a very small amount of that these days that we get a mandated cost recovery. We do submit it to the state of California. These days, it's not a significant amount of money. We've also put a plan together in terms of what is all of the equipment that we need to replace, whether it's public works vehicles, police vehicles, fire apparatus. What does that replacement plan look like? How much do we need to set aside each year to be able to replace those when and if they need to be replaced? And right now, currently in this plan, we are underfunding that particular dollar amount. We have the number. We're funding what we can at this point, but we're short approximately $4 million in being able to fully fund that equipment replacement fund. The other thing is that as part of the city charter, when you look at the general fund revenues and expenditures, which is about $300 million, 15% of that under the charter is required to be set aside for infrastructure and infrastructure replacement program. So it's an obligation that we have. We need to be able to fund each of that. That's part of our obligation as we put that budget document together. We're also challenged, like many organizations, in terms of having and retaining quality employees in the organization. And so we've recognized that challenge. And so in doing so, have approved some MOUs that include some enhancements in there to be able to fill critical positions that we have in our organization. So those costs are included in there to be able to recognize that we need to be able to fill those essential, especially public sector positions. There's also state-driven costs that we have, whether it includes the unfunded and ongoing pension costs with the state of California under the CalPERS program. We also have exposure as it relates to workers' compensation, general liability costs, and then we've got ongoing one-time projects that are also taking place. So, for example, we have 3 wells that were on the City Hall site that needed to be mitigated. There was a cost associated with those. Those are one-time costs that we have out there. But again, we have those kinds of challenges that are going on in the organization. So as we look at where we are from a cash perspective, we have reserves that have been set aside in the community under the general fund. And so what this graph shows you is the green portion that you see is what we call our assigned funds. Those are assigned by the City Council to be set aside for specific purposes. And then our blue is committed. And the largest chunk of that is for our economic uncertainty reserve policy that we have, where we're setting aside 2 months of our operating expenditures. And one of the things that is important to understand about that particular portion of this chart is when you pay your property tax, you only pay it 2 times a year. So currently we generate in the city about $108 million in property tax. You pay it in December, you pay it in May. That means that over $50 million gets drawn down over a 6-month period of time until we get that second tranche of property tax. That means that we've got to have cash flow in the organization to be able to cover that 6-month period of time. Sales tax comes in throughout the year. Property tax only comes in twice a year. So if you start digging into that, then you're in a position where the city is going to be looking at, I don't have enough ongoing cash to be able to meet those obligations. The purple section in there is restricted either by law or some legal requirement. And again, that's a portion of the funds that have been set aside. But what you will notice is, as you look to the right side of that graph, if we don't do anything as it relates to our structural deficit, we will eat into all of the assigned funds and start digging into that committed funds, which is essential for ongoing cash flow purposes for the organization. So again, that's another reason why it's important to address the issue, solve the issue permanently going forward. So where are we at right now? Where does our money come from for the city general fund? We have a lot of other funds, enterprise funds, those types of things, but what we're talking about this evening is the general fund. So we bring in about $301 million, almost $302 million. You will notice that the largest slice of this pie is property tax, that $108 million that I talked about a moment ago. Second largest slice of that pie is going to be sales tax. You will see franchise fees in here, our TOT from our local hotels, our utility user tax, licenses, permits, and again, you can see the various slices of the pie. The other one is the current charges for services. Those are what we call our user fees. So those are only paid by the individuals that utilize those particular services. So for, as an example, maybe it's a recreation program where you're paying a fee to be involved in that program, or you're going to do a room addition and you need to go to community development and get permits, and the plans need to be reviewed and inspections need to be made. There are fees associated with those particular services. So that's another slice of the pie out there. Where does the money go to? As you can see on the left, the majority of it is going to people. So in most cities, it's the people that are providing the services that you enjoy each and every day, whether it's public safety, whether it's recreation, whether it's public works, whether it is the internal departments that are supporting the other departments. So you look at finance, you look at HR, you look at the city clerk, you look at the city manager's office, they're all helping to support the other operating departments that may be more visible that you're seeing in the community. And then on the other side of that is how it is broken down by department. And you will notice that public safety, police and fire, and this, by the way, includes marine safety, is the largest chunk of that pie. And then the other departments come in on their pro rata share of that. So again, public safety, which is typical that I've seen in most organizations, is going to be a large chunk of that pie. It's critical for us in terms of one of our objectives is having a safe community and having those services available to us. So what have we done up to this point to address the structural deficit in the organization? So in the current budget, we reduced costs by just under $2 million a year. We have gone in and created something that we call managed hiring. So what this does is it looks at every single position in the organization, and each department must justify filling a vacancy. If somebody leaves the organization, retires, gets promoted into a different position, they must go through, and there's a committee that looks at every single hire in the organization and makes a determination whether we're going to fill it or we're not going to fill it. We've also included in and recognized that one of the challenges that almost every city has in California is being 100% employed. We've got all of the positions filled. That's very difficult to be able to do. And so we went back and looked historically at the number of vacancies that we had in the organization. And when we look at that historical average, typically we have at least 40 positions that are vacant at any given point in time. So we have calculated and put into the budget document a reduction in expenditures of about $6.2 million, recognizing that we're never going to be 100% employment in the organization. We've also looked at a variety of opportunities, whether it's Procure America that comes in and looks at our energy costs and they get a pro rata share of that, but we get the savings that are generated from those types of things. We've also updated our master user fee schedule, which I just alluded to a few minutes ago, making sure that that is cost reasonably borne, that we're recovering those costs essential to the services that we're providing. Also being able to go in and look at our EMS transport fees as well as our Cal Optima, which generated additional revenue to the city. We also have utilized some one-time money to be able to go in and set aside money in what's called the 115 Trust. It's money that's set aside for the pension obligations, future obligations, where we can come in and utilize that money to make payments to CalPERS when we see that that's the right time and the right place to be able to do that. We've also put money into the equipment replacement as well as the infrastructure fund. Our parking enforcement in the community has been very proactive after COVID. That kind of stopped for a period of time, but we're back to doing that proactively. We've looked at operating departments and made operational department efficiencies by, in some cases, combining, in some cases, making a division of a department so that we were being more efficient as we possibly can be. And then always looking at economic development activities. Where can we look at that opportunity to bring in additional revenue based on bringing in and attracting businesses and being a part of our community? So out of this long-range financial plan, a couple of things took place. One is it was another set of eyes that were looking at all of our revenue and expenditures in our general fund. I had done the same thing when I came on board back in September, is looking at it with another fresh set of eyes. And both of us have validated that the information and the numbers that you had been seeing are in fact correct and in the place where they need to be. And so one of the things that I think is important for our Huntington Beach residents to understand is we have very diverse revenue streams. Not every city in the state of California has, for example, utility user tax. So out of almost 483 cities in California, about 142 have a utility user tax. So we have that diverse revenue stream. And so when we look at the baseline revenues in the organization and we look at that compared to Fitch, Fitch, by the way, is one of the rating agencies. So most of you are kind of aware that, you know, you have your own credit score that, you know, the credit agencies give you, and they give you a numerical score. Well, we have the same thing in the public sector. Are we AAA rated? Are we AA rated? Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's are those credit agencies that look at our organization and compare us to the data that's sitting there and give us a rating accordingly. We also have existing debt service in the general fund. Some of that will be expiring over the next few years, but that money was utilized to be able to finance essential capital projects out there in the community. We've also done a really good job of setting aside the reserves, as you saw in that previous slide where you saw the green and the blue and the purple. That's money set aside. That's reserve money that's been consciously and prudently set aside in the organization. And that represents about 37% of baseline expenditures, which again, the credit rating agencies are going to look at it and say, hey, you're doing a good job in that particular area. That's part of the reason why we have a AAA rating. If, in fact, we don't solve the structural problem, that projection goes down to 20%. What that means at the end of the day is there is the potential to get a lower credit rating. And what that means, just like with you and your own credit score, is the cost of borrowing becomes more expensive. The interest rates become higher because you're at a higher risk than somebody else may be. So again, some things to look at from a fiscal outlook when we look at some of the challenges and concerns that we have in the organization. As I've indicated throughout this presentation, we have a structural deficit that we need to address and be able to solve for. We have pension management that we need to be able to deal with. We've got CalPERS, whose projection is about a 6.8% return. Several years ago, they actually went into the negative. And one of the things that we get to deal with is whatever year that happens, we don't see the impact of that for 2 years, because the numbers that we pay in the current year are based on 2 years ago. The good news is for June 30th of this current fiscal year, of June of '24, they were projecting about a 9.5% return, but we're not going to see the benefits of that for a couple of years. So again, being able to manage those reserves and the additional discretionary payments that we may utilize through our Section 115 trust. Our labor costs, as we look at the historical information, is right at the baseline at just under 3%. So we're maintaining those costs as compared to other agencies. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the mayor and the mayor pro tem to kind of talk about what they would like to look at from each of you this evening.
All right. I think you did a pretty complete job, and I want to thank you all for attending. That was pretty full. We're done. Just kidding. Just kidding. I know you guys probably have more questions. I don't have any, but do you want to say anything?
Are there other slides on there or no?
Yes. Oh.
Yeah. So basically, you know, between now and then we're going to have another town hall in March. And then, like I said, every city council meeting until we adopt the budget in June is go through, you know, basically every single city department in public for you guys to basically dissect it, to understand, you know, how many employees each department has, the services we're providing, kind of really just get a under the hood look at each one, and then from there, you know, get feedback from all of you of, you know, with those services and programs, which are kind of prioritize them from, you know, premium to critical. Are there, you know, public investments or services that you guys feel should be given a priority over others? What's your vision for the community? And then, like I touched on earlier, you know, what other revenue generating opportunities should we pursue? I've, you know, recently been given a bunch of creative ones and interesting ones from community members that we're exploring. But again, the goal of this is to be as transparent as possible, bring you guys into the room. I look at all of us as a big family, and when your budget is a little underwater, you got to prioritize things and tighten the belt a bit and focus and get through it, which I'm confident we will. So that's really the genesis of these town halls and then these city council meetings. So just kind of keep that in your mind when you're asking questions or have any feedback you want to provide to us.
I think one good example is we used to be on an 8-year road repair. Now we're on a 12-year. That's one of the cost kind of methods we're doing. We're trying to keep them safe and good for everybody, but not staying within our budget. With that, we'll take some questions. Mr. Einhorn.
You mentioned about a managed hiring reduction of fees of $6.2 million. And what is the time period for that savings to occur?
Yeah.
It's already baked in.
David's going to answer the question, but what I am going to say, if you have questions, we'd love it if you could make your way over to the microphone over there. This is being live streamed, so I want to make sure that those out in the public can hear your question. So if, David, would you mind responding, and if you could repeat what the question was?
Yeah, so I believe I understand the question to be is when you're looking at the salary savings based on the vacancies, the $6.2 million, that is reflective of the current fiscal year. Now, when we look at the percentage numbers, we went back over a historical 10 years. But we update that number each year because salary numbers change. People go into different pay scale areas, and so we will update that number as we put next year's budget number together. But that represents the current fiscal year.
It's also, it's also a good baseline number to keep in mind. So every 40 employee positions represents about $6.2 million as an expense. So obviously, that's just kind of a good baseline to understand. I mean, we have, what, over 1,000? A little bit over 1,000 full-time employees.
And something I should, let's stay on topic on the budget with the questions. Yes, ma'am.
On the expenditures, nearly 25% was listed as non-departmental expenses. Can you give us an idea of what some of the largest expenditures are in that portion of the budget?
Serena.
You gotta get up.
Yeah, I will let my budget specialist answer that question, Serena.
So a lot of the non-departmental expenses are things that are citywide that aren't particular to any one department. For example, utility costs to turn the lights on and the water and everything, and then the debt service payments for the city, because it doesn't belong to any particular department.
So what proportion roughly is currently debt service?
It's about, do you know off the top? I'd have to go back and look. I don't know the percentage of the non-departmental budget off the top of my head.
Okay, but is it like 10% or 15 or, just roughly?
I think it's probably a little bit more than that of the non-departmental budget.
Okay. all
Yeah,
right.
and then the other part of non-departmental budget is transfers too. So that's, for example, we fund workers' compensation costs and general liability costs. So those come out of the general fund and are transferred to those special funds so that the money is set aside for those particular purposes.
So the city's infrastructure currently has a D rating. And if you went through the forecasting that you presented at the last city council meeting, infrastructure was explicitly excluded from the forecasting, as was equipment replacement, as was staffing, as was reimbursements from EMS. So my first question is, if you're trying to be transparent, why did you put the same slide up tonight, knowing that I asked that question at the last council meeting? What's your plan to deal with it? And then as a follow-on question, given that you've made Huntington Beach a pariah and we depend on tourism, a lot of people won't come here and won't spend their money here any longer because of some of the things you've done. What's your plan to fix that?
I mean, the information that we provided this evening is the same information as was provided the other evening.
Exactly,
None of that
and the other evening it said explicitly excluded from the forecast were 4 items: equipment replacement, infrastructure, staffing, and EMS replacement, funding replacement uncertainty. So why haven't you included those things? You're giving us the same stuff again. You said you were going to be transparent. I asked this question at the last city council meeting. You're giving me the same story again, leaving those out. That is a huge, job 101 for being a city council member is keep the city running. So if you're not dealing with infrastructure and you're not dealing with equipment replacement and you're not dealing with staffing, you're not doing your job.
So the infrastructure number that we're talking about is the report card. So that is all of the infrastructure throughout the city that was presented several meetings ago. That is several hundreds of millions of dollars.
I understand that,
is
but the
probably-
graph you showed showing what our budget looks like in the forecast, showing debts out to 2033, excluded dealing with infrastructure, excluded dealing with equipment replacement. So our financial challenges are a whole hell of a lot worse than what you've represented to us.
So again, as I indicated with the infrastructure number, that's a large number. We're looking at other options. You cannot take that number and put it into the ongoing revenue and expenditure and be able to
But you should
finance
be
it.
putting it into reserves to be able to repair that infrastructure over time. You actually
Absolutely.
talked about how 15 to 17% of general fund is going into the infrastructure reserve. Well, we still have to deal with that. Whether you put it in the budget, whether you put it in the forecast or not, we still have to deal with it.
That is a correct statement.
Thank you.
No, and I'll respond to your second, comment. I mean, that's obviously your opinion. But when vans, no, it was opinion that people don't want to come here and spend money. So when Vans pulled out of the U.S. Open, everyone said we'd never get a sponsor. Well, we got a sponsor, I think, a few weeks later. So we have several businesses that approach us every single day, several big events that want to come here. There's going to be a new rodeo on the beach coming. The Darker Waves Festival was the single best day for hotels in terms of occupancy and hotel rates that we've ever experienced. You can ask all the hotel operators. Those promoters are talking about expanding that event. We're approached all the time by companies that want to invest here, that want to hold conventions in our hotels. So I would just respectfully disagree with your comment that we are a pariah and no one wants to come here and invest, because it's just not true. Go ahead.
Good evening, folks. My first one's for David. I think it'll be quick, and then I have another one too, if that's okay. That'll be a little longer. We saw the baseline forecast tonight. Are there any other forecasts for different macro environments, such as if we enter a higher inflationary period? Have we produced those?
That plan right now utilizes what we call the conservative baseline for it. We have the ability to be able to put that in. As you know, with the economy, it's a little hard to predict where it's going to go.
Yeah.
But the model itself has the ability to be able to do that. So if we see something that's coming along in the horizon, we would be able to put that in there.
Thank you. My second one has to do with property tax revenue. I know that all 7 of our councilors have campaigned against high-density development, and on its face, that's fine. I understand why people wouldn't want it, but it does cut into our tax revenue to do that, and I was wondering if the council would be willing to project how tax revenue might improve if we deregulated zoning a little bit, if we allowed free enterprise to do it, if we could get a projection of that kind. And just as a thought experiment, I looked at my neighborhood, which was built in, I think, 2021, 2022. I looked at the property taxes that my little 1.3 acres and our 21 units generate, and I looked at about 40 acres of land within a mile of me, which are very underdeveloped. I live on Gothard, in the Gothard, Maine, and Garfield block, for context, so I'm looking at that area of Garfield, which is very underdeveloped. Some of those properties are a full acre, don't generate $1,000 in tax. Our 1.3 acres generates $400,000 in tax. I know the city doesn't get all of that, but surely, I don't know what we can do to try to get some of these properties redeveloped, and this is probably the most extreme example that I did here, but you know, if we upzone those 40 acres, it would bring the city, with the city's share, and I did an 11% share for the city, I calculated $1 million to redevelop those 40 acres, and that's a pretty small slice of the city.
Yeah, so to touch on that, so you know, the free market is alive and well in our city. Our city has a very carefully crafted general plan that takes years to draft and implement, and the voters elect the representatives to effectuate that general plan. The issue is when the state comes in and forces you to change that zoning and change that general plan. And like I've said several times on the dais, we have finite roads, finite infrastructure, resources, water table, et cetera. Our general plan takes all of those factors into account. The issue is now is when the state comes in and forces you to build high-density housing to pack more and more people into those limited finite resources and subvert your local control. So I think the better way to address it is to embolden the free market more, and we've done that with our Streamline HB program when we were campaigning, and I experienced this in my business in commercial real estate, is many cities take forever to get your permits, and you spend a ton of time and money getting either your house remodeled, your business open, getting your certificate of occupancy. And I mentioned through the Streamline program, we went out to Riverside to look what they did, the one-stop shop. Realized it didn't fit our needs because they were more building out their infrastructure in City Hall. We realized most of our permits now are done online through Acela. So in 1 year through the Streamline program, we increased our certificates of occupancy issued by 23%. So that's more businesses opening up faster, creating jobs faster, generating sales tax revenue faster, remodeling your home quicker. So those are ways to really incentivize business to come here and then find these vacant lots you referenced. What is the current zoning, and then find the highest and best use under that current zoning.
I'd like to
Go ahead.
Also, you saw right on the screen, personnel. That's our heaviest cost in our budget. And there comes a breaking point where you start adding people to this city, and we're projected actually over the next, I believe, 10, 20 years to continue to lose population in this city. And that's okay, and I'm all for free enterprise. That's what I want. I don't like the mandates being shoved on us because we can govern ourselves, and we should be allowed to govern ourselves. And besides that, that breaking point I'm talking about is that means that we got to start providing more services. We got to have more policemen, more firemen, more equipment, more road work, more everything, and that'll eat up that property tax quick. And it won't, I don't believe, will be economically safe or good for the city, and it's all at a cost of our quality of life that we enjoy in this city. And that's where our differences come. It's not just housing and add people. It's gonna cost, and none of that, it's expensive, and it'll cost us in many ways.
If I may, I don't actually support the state's housing mandates. I support them as the lesser of two evils relative to our very restrictive zoning that we have. And I would certainly not characterize our residential market as free market at all. It's centrally planned. But I was just asking if it would be possible for the city to generate a projection so that citizens could compare and make a choice, as opposed to just choosing, we don't want high-density development. Can we choose, would we like high-density development in exchange for these additional revenues and additional expenses?
Speaking for myself, I think that's a very complex analysis you're asking us to provide based on all the factors that the
Got
mayor...
the revenue side.
Sure, but can you quantify the expenses side? Can you quantify the infrastructure being put to a breaking point? I mean, there's so many factors in place.
I'll
But
give you a
again,
resume.
Again, manage the general plan through your elected representatives. And again, you touched on it. We campaigned on pushing back against high-density housing. We're
Would
almost
David
100%
answer
built
that
up.
one? Can we do what would a projection take?
I mean, if you want to answer, you don't have to.
Well, I will tell you that we use an outside consulting firm that it provides data for us for property tax. So we are looking at it on a regular basis based on the way that it's currently zoned. Would they have the ability to be able to go in and do projections? Yeah, I'm assuming that they could. But the data that we're using right now is what is currently set up for within the community. We also look at it from the perspective of we have a number of businesses that feel that their valuation is higher than they would like it to be. They appeal it. So we have an appeal process at the county level that they can go through. We're also tracking that information. So we look at it on a regular basis. We look at every piece of parcel within the city and what it's generating on behalf of the city.
Understood. Thank you. My very last thing, and I'll go. Per capita, you do dense, things are less expensive. You have quarter-acre lots, the roads, the sewers, the electricity, the cable, all of that. You have to run it farther. I don't believe that it is more expensive. Thank you.
Next question.
I'm shorter than you, Perry. Apparently. So I actually have two questions. The first one regarding the city's EMS services and the CalOptima agreement. Did I understand correctly that you're looking at potentially ending the contract with CalOptima regarding the EMS services? I would like a little clarity on that.
No, we're not gonna cancel it, no.
Okay, so can you explain specifically what the what we were talking about regarding the CalOptima contract and our EMS services? It was a little unclear.
So what we were actually identifying is with the EMS transportation fees, we made upward adjustments on those, so that actually generated revenue. So between that and the Optima, it was about $7 million in additional revenue to the city going forward.
Okay, so the increased revenue, thank you, I appreciate that. The increased revenue, is that a cost that's going to CalOptima, or is that a cost that is going to the people who are being transported in the ambulances?
I think if they're part of med, they get billed, and then insurances pay the other.
Because I know that that can be a choice of cities. Some cities allow CalOptima to cover that, and some cities don't, that's what I'm trying to understand from that.
Yeah, that would be a question I'd need to have fire be able to answer at this point. We'd be happy to get back with you and get you an answer on that one.
I would love an answer, yeah. I know that we've got 7.5% of this city is under the poverty line, and just over 19% makes under $50,000. So I would be concerned about anything that is requiring us to balance the budget on the backs of the impoverished people of this city. So I would love an answer on that. The other question I had was actually...
That's three, Keenan. That's three questions already. This will be a fourth.
So 2 topics. One topic being the EMS. Thank you for clarifying. The second one, I actually had a question for Lisa-Lane Barnes regarding the city clerk's report card. You had mentioned about in improvements that were made about optimized processes for passports and remaining compliant with the legal standards. Could you speak a little more about the specifics of what that means?
If we can, we're going to stay on budget. Like, if you can, just set up an appointment with her and get the answers. But let's
was
stay
that
on
not
budget.
a part
We're
of the
hitting
budget?
No, it wasn't part of the budget. It was just she had a special presentation. But I'd like to stay on budget, focused on that.
So you
just
don't
set up an
want
appointment and
that
ask
question answered?
Not at this point, no.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for clarifying that,
No
Pat.
problem. Amory.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say I think we've done a great job. The City Council has done a great job trying to get a lot of the events coming that are coming in the pipeline and previously. However, one event that we have had in the past that for whatever reason we didn't have last year is the Cherry Blossom Festival. And I know that's a one that makes a particular amount of money. I think it has the second most international visitors, because some of the other events are more American, the parade, for example. So I'm wondering if we're going to have one this year, if there's any hope we might have one in the future, and what are the reasons we're not having it, if any?
Well, that's a fundraiser for the sister city, and
Okay.
Unfortunately, it just was under sponsored, under organized, and that's a subject for the sister city.
Okay.
All that benefits go to the sister city committee.
All right, thank you so much. Good,
All right, thank you.
good question.
Mr. Inouye.
I'm done. So.
Thank you. I want to thank you for making the initial presentation on the budget. But I think, Pat, particularly since you have a finance degree, and Casey, you as a businessman, and Dan, as you as an accountant, you understand that you cannot have a full financial report without a balance sheet. I think the balance sheet is the other side of a significant set of financial statements that needs to be presented as well. And I'll say this in particularly because we have the infrastructure report that says very specifically that some of these repairs are supposed to come out of the general fund. So I think there should be some reconciliation between the infrastructure report, the report that you're presenting now, to make sure that those things are done. And I'd also like to point out a 2022 report that pointed out some of the natural hazards and potential natural disasters that could occur in the city. I'm hoping that the infrastructure report addresses those issues, and at the same time, those financial costs to prevent those particular disasters are included in the operating costs. So please, I've also given to the mayor a listing of 5 questions that I hope will be answered to me directly. I did want to make sure my presentation about not having all the financial information is, people know that because we need the balance sheet. We need it to be integrated with the infrastructure report. Thank you.
Next speaker, please. Question, please.
Thank you. Just a suggestion, is there a single email address to send inquiries to so that there could be, in the next presentation, maybe responses to some of the questions from residents?
If you want to send questions to you can go ahead and send it to our media distribution list, and then our Office of Communications will route the responses. So that email address is media@surfcity-hb.org.
Thank you. And I had a couple of questions about lawsuits. And part of it is, I know that how many funds does the city have where transactions are recorded, and some items are transferred out of the general fund to these specific funds. But, and then specifically about lawsuits and the city attorney's office, to have some presentation on the costs and both labor, personnel, outsourcing, and settlements, where ongoing lawsuits, how are those recorded? In the general fund or in other specific funds? Ongoing and settled lawsuits. That would be very helpful, and I think would answer a lot of questions that residents have.
So there is a liability fund that has been set up. It's part of our internal service fund. So we have workers' comp, we have a liability fund. That liability fund sets aside money for potential litigation. Part of the audit process with our outside auditor is to review those line items to get feedback from not only the city attorney's office, but other attorneys that we may use, whether they're HR related, and what those exposures are. Workers' comp, that falls into that category also. They do an analysis on an annual basis. They looked at it closely this year and felt that the funds that we had set aside were adequate. That number right now is about $35 million.
For ongoing lawsuits, correct?
Yes.
And that's where any settlements would be recorded, correct?
I'm sorry?
Any settlements would be recorded against those
Yes.
more or less reserve setup. Okay, thank you. And then I guess when we get into the departmental budget presentations, you'll show more detail about the city attorney's
Yeah,
office.
this was an overview, as he said in his
Yeah.
presentation. He began with it. This is just a high-level overview.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next, please.
I want to set the context just a little bit. Given what we just learned about the percentage of citizens here who live at or below the poverty level, given the number of citizens in Huntington Beach who have incomes of $50,000 or less, given that a lot of homeowners rely on housekeepers, pool cleaners, given that our fast food restaurants rely on minimum wage employees, that restaurants have waiters and waitresses who rely on tips only for their incomes. Help me understand our reluctance to do high-density housing, which could provide lower housing costs to these levels of people, or do we just want them all to come from other cities to travel in and work in Huntington Beach? Given how much apartments cost and how much single homes cost, I'm just trying to figure how that puzzle piece fits in for us in terms, I just got done traveling to other states and things, and so many of the people that I just mentioned live in the town they work in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just not seeing how we're making room for those people.
Sure. So I am in the real estate development industry.
Yes.
So there's no empirical data to support that adding more high-density housing will create affordable housing, especially in California. California is by far the most expensive state to build in because of government overregulation and building code requirements, fees, and studies you have to perform. We build projects across the country, and like I said, California is twice as much. That all flows down to the end consumer, the renter, the home buyer. Chapman Economist just came out with an article about 3 weeks ago touching on this. What's interesting, so if you build a high-density housing apartment, the 20% are supposed to be at an affordable level. The challenge is the 80% charge top-of-market rents to subsidize those 20% to make them, quote, affordable. And then what happens is those 80% units that are getting top-of-market rents drive up the entire rental market for the entire city, thereby making the city more unaffordable to live in as a whole. So there is, like I said, no empirical data in a city, especially like Huntington Beach, some of the best and most valuable real estate in the world, that's already 100% built out on the Pacific Ocean, that if you add more high-density apartments here, it's going to create more affordable housing. It's just not true. Because like I said, those 80% have to subsidize those 20% units, and those 80% drive up the rental rate market for the entire city.
I see. But we also have a mandate from the state. But we also have a mandate from the state of California to build low-cost housing, which we haven't been doing, and doesn't that also compound this problem?
So on that, so we've actually built more affordable housing than many of our neighboring cities. Unfortunately, we say that all the time, and for whatever reason, people haven't heard us, but we actually have done our fair share. We're a responsible neighbor. We have built thousands of units of affordable housing. To your point about the state, yes, the state is mandating that we build high-density housing apartments. They're taking away our local control that you guys elected us to effectuate. And it's no secret, we are in multiple lawsuits with the state over these forced high-density housing mandates that are unfunded, by the way. So they're making us build these high-density housing units without any funding for it. So that's just the reality. We were elected to fight it, and we are fighting it, and we're in 2 lawsuits, and these lawsuits have to be adjudicated.
I want to start by thanking you for having this forum. I think it's really helping us understand the dilemmas that the city faces. I want to go back to infrastructure for a minute. I was at that meeting where there was a discussion of how many C and D level projects there were out there. And I think I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the $50 million deficit projected does not include all of those projects that we probably need to do. So my question really is, shouldn't we have a budget projection that does include more of those C and D projects? And then I have 2 just very brief follow-up questions on other revenue streams. So maybe that first question first.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it kind of, if I may also clarify your question, is when we look at the baseline budget, which is our adopted budget that was adopted last June, that is our baseline. And so we identified things that were not in that number. Our long-range financial plan has the ability to be able to do scenarios. So one of the scenarios we want to be able to run is, what if we fund the full amount of the equipment replacement going all the way up to the 11 million? What does that look like? If we put the infrastructure money in there, what does that look like? So the plan's really designed to say, here's the baseline today, based on what was approved by City Council for the current fiscal year, what's not in it, and then we're able to run scenarios to run those numbers so that you know exactly what that looks like in that model. So that's what it's designed to do.
So will we see something that's other than the $50 million deficit because you'll be including other expenditures?
In those scenarios, we can run them either way. If we're looking at revenue enhancements, we've got the ability to be able to do that.
I wish we could see that.
Okay. And that's part of this process.
The next 2 questions I have are really, there are short no answers to, but could we, as a city, increase the hotel tax? I saw that it was a significant, not an insignificant amount of revenue. Could we do that?
The voters could, but there is that inflection point, right, where it's too high, and then you're going to limit your occupancy level, right? For sure. And the hotels at this point, Phil, we're at that threshold. So there's TOT, right? There's transit occupancy tax, which is 10%. So the city gets all of that. You'll see it, when you go to Vegas or another hotel, you itemize receipt. Then you have T-bid, and that's what goes directly to our Visit HB. And that money, we don't get any, but the hotels actually self-assess themselves. So they allocate that money to market our city to put heads in beds, as they call it. So to answer your initial question, there's just that sensitivity line of what is too much. But that is always on the table. If that were to happen, the voters would have to approve it.
And lastly, do we have any discretion on sales tax?
Sure. And that's a big part of this is that, when we got in, there was a lot of pressure to just put a sales tax increase to the voters. And I don't personally feel we're there yet. I feel we have to go through this exercise. That's why we're doing this with you guys, to bring you inside the room and be like, that's the easy solution, right? Just pass the sales tax. That's 1% is another 50 million in revenue to our general fund, but a lot of people, the lady just touched on it, are on a fixed income, right? I understand that not all our residents will pay that, but I believe, and we do as well, the mayor and the other council members, we need to go through this exercise to create as many efficiencies as possible, create as many other revenue generating opportunities as possible. If at some point, years down the road, we get to that final end line and that's our only option, sure, but I just don't feel we're there yet.
Yeah, I guess the bottom line is if we really have all those C and D infrastructure
Sure.
projects and we have to fund them, we might have to do something like that.
But yeah, I agree, but also, you could just kind of prioritize which ones are critical of those services and address those first, and our Public Works Department does that, but that's something we'll touch on when the Public Works Department comes up on council and we kind of walk through. But again, I keep saying, like, this is like a family. We're going through the family budget, and we got some, the car needs to get fixed. Well, how many more miles can we get on it? Well, it might last another 6 months. Okay, well, what else do we need to handle now? And so you're really looking at your financial situation while at the same time, can we get a second job? Can we bring in more money? What other expenses can we tighten up, create efficiencies? That's what this exercise is, and these are all really good questions.
Thanks for letting us go through it with you.
Hi. I have a couple of different questions. One, it's great that we have a AAA credit rating. At the last council meeting, it was discussed during the forecast that, 2 different slides. One, that the ROPS redevelopment loan funds that were received were assumed to only be able to be used for one-time funds. And then on a later slide, they were discussed as being used for ongoing recurring expenses. It's my understanding when we talked before that we could not use those for recurring or the operating expenses because it could impact our credit rating. Is that correct? Or can you speak to that?
So the waterfront money that we've received to date has been utilized to do one-time funding of various internal service funds or equipment replacement funds that has not been used to balance the budget.
But in the last PowerPoint presentation, initially it showed that assumption, and then later on it actually showed it being used in one of the slides in the table.
Well, I think what you might be referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in the budget, we showed the revenue coming in, the expenditures going out because we wanted to be able to reflect it in that particular chart. But when you look at how it was utilized for one-time type items.
There's actually a bullet in there, if I'm not mistaken, that says that it, on the second slide, that it could be used for recurring. So I just would like that talked about maybe in the future.
Yeah, the way the city policy is right now cannot be used for reoccurring. We have not used it for reoccurring up to this point.
Okay. Regarding the transit occupancy tax audit, I know that hadn't been done for a long time. Are we going to be hearing about the results of that?
Yes, in terms of timeline, I don't know, but that's something I know when you were up there with us that we were interested in, that auditing like the TOTs. It was shocking to us, I speak for myself, that we're actually on the honor system with our hotels and our short-term rentals. So we're working currently on auditing all of their, payments and expenses and revenue generated to the city.
Okay, thank you. With regards to the Navigation Center funding, can you share a little bit about why the city is going to have to fully fund Navigation Center funding from the general plan? And then part 2 of that question is you had talked at the last council meeting questioning why past councils had not sought funding from the county and that you were going to seek that from Supervisor Wynn. Can you talk a little bit about both?
Yeah, so Supervisor Wynn right now is, I just spoke to her before this meeting, and she's working on helping us achieve funding for Navigation Center and then hopefully Be Well also. So that's in process. The goal is to hopefully get both of those funded before June when we have to adopt the budget. But she's working on it very diligently, and like I said, we talk often, and she called me today right before this meeting.
First part of the question, though, was why are we going to have to pay out of the general fund for that since we don't currently do that?
I would assume you're talking about we don't have grants to pay for it anymore? Is that what you're alluding to?
That's what I wanted to ask you.
So a lot of times, guys, when you have grants, there's like strings attached, especially like on high density and some of those issues. So we decided as a council not to, go forward on some of these high density projects. And sometimes there's grants, but regardless, the point I brought up in the last meeting is that there was actually an option for the county to fund the Navigation Center because the county is funding navigation centers for many cities in our county right now. Why they were never asked that question in the first place blows me away, because homelessness is under the purview of the county. So the county should be funding our homeless navigation center, and also be well if we can afford it. So that's really the crux of the issue.
I know that. So the great thing about that is that, and Kim can talk to this too, is the county actually did fund the building of the navigation center, the structure, and we did look at funding operations through them as well, and we continued to look at that when we were looking at the healing center prior to looking at the current version model.
Right.
But with that, like you just talked about, strings come attached with that, and the strings attached are, the city of Huntington Beach has said repeatedly that the community does not want the navigation center or homeless services to become a magnet for outside of the community. We want to serve Huntington Beach residents, correct?
Yeah, you have to have a connection to the
So
city.
exactly. So the challenge is when you receive funding from the county, and the reason that we chose not to do that, and past councils actually chose not to do it, is because those strings are attached. And you then have to then provide services and accept folks from beyond the city of Huntington Beach. And so it's not that the other councils didn't consider looking for funding, it's that there are strings attached, and our residents had said that they don't want those strings.
Sure,
and
well,
what would come with that.
I understand. That was also a different landscape 2 years ago when we got elected. I mean, since then, in 23, we put 56 people into permanent housing, and then last year we did 76 people, which are records. So the landscape has changed. So now it's pursuing other opportunities with the county. Now I believe we have an ally and supervisor, Nguyen, that can really help us. And she's actually looking at other sources that aren't through the county that wouldn't have strings attached. So laws have changed. But regardless, we're on it, we're looking at it, and we're looking to solve that piece, because between Be Well and the Navigation Center, that represents 40% of our projected budget deficit. If we can solve that piece, that's huge, and we have until June to figure it out.
You know,
I mean, it's not meant to be like a debate, right? We're just asking questions.
It's not a debate. I just want to make sure that we're getting
I'm trying to be respectful of other
truth.
people's time to answer questions. Like, if you want to come attack us or
I'm
debate,
not attacking you.
okay. If you want to have a debate, then we set a meeting. But this is supposed to be about the budget, answering questions. It feels like it's turning into a
The
debate.
navigation center operations cost millions of dollars, so I think it's very important to talk about that.
Okay, I feel like I just answered the question pretty fairly.
But I think that the thing that you didn't talk about is there are still strings attached there. And I know that the people of
I
Huntington
just said
Beach...
it, talking with Supervisor Nguyen, she mentioned some other opportunities that wouldn't be through the county, some other services to help provide that funding. So when I have more details, I will bring it in front of the public through these meetings, and hopefully there will be no strings attached.
And then one last thing with regards to homelessness. This is important to me because it's one of the main issues that I focused on prior to being on council and during being on council. You keep talking about what we did, what you did as a council, and also the other things that I've heard, specifically with the overview that was done, the annual overview, I forget, it was the mayor's event, was talking about how prosecution and the homeless task force and the police have done good work to do what you just said, which is to house people. And what I'll say is it's a system of care which has not been talked about, which includes our caseworkers, social workers, volunteers, and the entire system. And it's really disappointing to me when it's only law enforcement and prosecution that are mentioned. And I know it's all of those things beyond that. And I just want it all acknowledged, because when we're talking about cutting staff potentially at some point or freezing, we're not acknowledging a lot of the staff that are doing the work. So it's really important that we acknowledge them so we don't lose them, especially when we have these future conversations. And this last thing, I know I have a lot of questions, but I think that they're valid. Brain drain and workforce retention. We've talked about managed hiring, which is important, and I appreciate that. But we've also had a huge, very high turnover and vacancy rate in the city. I would say as a result of a lot of the things that have been happening here, making a really volatile environment.
No.
And I know that from having worked in here.
No.
But the question is this, which is regarding the financials of that. It's expensive to have to recruit and to train and to retain. And I'm curious what the dollar amounts are projected for that.
I mean, we haven't looked at that, but to answer your question, or your statement, the fact is Oliver Chi went to Irvine and then poached all of our department heads to go with him. And that's basically a fact of what we did was...
I'm talking about staff, not just department heads.
Regardless, we promoted from within. We have a lot of talent here. And I'm happy most of our department heads are women, which is amazing, and they're all really talented. We have a deep bench, and we promoted from within, and we have really great department heads and staff throughout the city, and that's really the reality.
You talked about a managed hiring with the 40-person vacancy that's typical. Do we still have over 100?
So I think we answered a lot of your questions. Please, can we have the next person? I mean,
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a budget-related question, if it's all right. And the question of sales tax, what I have heard or read is that because of the transition of a lot of purchasing to online purchasing as opposed to brick and mortar purchasing, a consequence of that is that the sales tax which is collected for online purchases is retained by the state, whereas sales taxes that come from brick and mortar are divided up. Is that a true statement or not?
No, it's not.
Okay.
So the online sales is allocated to the county in which it takes place, and then the county then proratas that dollar amount by the agencies that are within the county. So we get a significant amount of sales tax from online sales. We have a line item that will show the various online entities, and that revenue does come in on its pro rata share.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everybody. And again, thank you so much for holding this town hall. I really want to take this opportunity to clarify a couple of statements that have been made by Councilmember McKeon. And
Can you please just keep it to the budget, though?
sure, it is about the budget. This particular council inherited a wonderful budget. When I was on the council, the year I was mayor, we had a $10 million surplus. When I left, it was a $15 million surplus. And we put that on the record, and we stated it repeatedly. So this false notion that somehow this new council has inherited this train wreck is
do a political
absolutely
statement
unfair.
someplace else.
It's unfair.
Because-
So again,
you're
hold
done.
on, I'm going to get to the
Just get
point.
to a question. Just
What
get to
we're
a question.
talking about was a structural deficit. This is called a town hall, Pat. We go back and forth.
Okay, but I brought up when I was running, and you went through the roof when I brought up the budget. That
You
was
know what? I
declining
brought up the
steadily.
budget because you couldn't read a spreadsheet. And so I
it
felt
was
that it
right
was
out of your
important
budget.
that we actually had a town hall to go over the spreadsheet. When we're talking about the homeless, all the homeless services that we have, I think it's really important that we realize if we had a compliant housing element, we would be eligible for SB2 funding. That kind of funding would fund the types of services that would be able to do what we need to do at the Navigation Center. And Casey, you keep talking about how the state is forcing us to build housing. The state can't force us to build anything. What it wants is us to zone for housing and to give us the local control to decide exactly where we want to put that type of housing. That's the truth. This whole notion that the state is going to force us to build, the city doesn't build a thing. It can't build a thing, but we can zone for it. And if we did have a housing compliant that was compliant, not only would we be eligible for SB2 funding, which is millions of dollars, we'd be eligible for grants, and no, there's not a lot of strings attached to it. I work in the state Senate now, and I see cities getting all of this money that we pay into the state, but we do not get it back. So my question to you, Casey, is eventually you're going to have to put that housing element together. The judge has already ruled it. When are you going to do it? Because we have a structural problem here. And you need to start thinking big.
That's your solution to build high density, get your way out of it?
You know what, Casey? It's not about building high-density housing. It's about taking advantage of the tools that are available to us, which is having a compliant housing element that you can actually decide where you're going to put it.
Yeah.
Take advantage of the SB2 funding and all of the grants and start looking at structurally, what are you doing wrong here? It's been said over and over again. You have a structural deficit. You're not going to be able to cut your way to profitability sustainability. I worked in business for 25 years. I know how this game is played. You need serious revenue. You need to completely revise the way you're doing things now because you have taken the city off the fiscal cliff. You inherited a $15 million surplus.
So
a $15 million, and now look what we are doing.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you.
I
Thank you.
said it. Thank
Yep.
you.
So go back to when we were first elected in 23. No, it's okay.
Oh, fine. I'd
No,
love to.
no,
I'd
it's not
love
a
to.
debate. It's just
No, I'd love
look
to hear
at
your
that.
response.
Look at that budget deficit when we first walked in. And there was, you go back to that first meeting in 2023. The projected deficit right when we walked in. You guys want to know why they had a surplus? Look at that big blue line right there. See that ARPA local fund?
And you know
American
what else we
Rescue Act.
did? A
That's
pension
all
obligation
COVID money.
bond. A pension
That's
obligation
all
bond.
COVID money.
We addressed our UAL like
That
no other
interesting.
council did.
Okay.
That
Thank
saved
you.
us $127 million.
There it is, the COVID money. Thank you, guys.
I did.
Ken, we're going to do one more question. She hasn't answered one. You've already asked a question. Do you mind letting her go? All right. You sure?
I did have two more questions regarding the staffing, but I did also want to say thank you to the chief who explained the answer to my question. And he did explain that it is regarding the insurance side of things, and this wouldn't impact the members of the community. So thank you to the chief for taking me aside to explain that.
Perfect.
The other questions I had were both regarding staffing. I did want to ask, what is the current vacancy numbers for roles within the city?
Travis, do we have that number? Current vacancy amount of staff? Between 80 and 100 total.
Okay, thank you. And then my other question.
And just to clarify, we're actually above average of full-time employees over the years, so that's not, like the lowest I think was like 900, the highest was like 1,100 and change. We're right around like 1,000.
Okay. So I have a number of friends of mine who work within the city, and they have expressed their concern to me at how they have a lot of their employees are leaving. I believe Public Works lost 4 last week, and yet there's the understanding that they have that those roles are not being filled. And so their workload is increasing, which is making them want to leave the city. So is that something, the concern about making sure that we're not doubling up the workload or tripling up the workload for existing staffers, is that being included in how we're doing that, the managed staffing?
David touched on that initially, right? The analysis that.
Yeah, so with the managed hiring, as we look at the individual positions, I am not aware of any public works positions where we haven't said go ahead and fill that position.
Okay, now is that the case across the board? I just referenced public works, but the question was regarding the whole city departments.
Yeah, typically when we're looking at a position that has been vacated by somebody or a promotion has taken place, and we've been funding it in the past, we continue to fund it going forward. So usually the answer to that is, yes, you may fill it. Now, one of the challenges you have when somebody leaves is if you don't have an eligibility list, it's going to take you several months to be able to fill that position. So CFO position we're working on it, but it's still vacant at this time. It's taken some time to be able to fill that.
Gotcha. So I just want to clarify. So there aren't currently positions that are being considered not filled. It's just this is looking forward that may happen. Is that correct?
Can you rephrase that? I didn't understand.
Yeah, sure. So you were talking about in the managed the planned management. I apologize if I'm misremembering the name of it, but that you would be looking at the roles that currently exist, and when people vacate those roles, looking at whether or not you would fill those roles moving forward. That's what I understood from the presentation. So is that something that you're doing moving forward, or is that something that is currently happening?
So that that budget number, the 6.2 million, is roughly on average 40 positions. And so we're planning to hit that, at least hit that savings this budget year. We have to do it this budget year. But as we talked earlier, right now there's probably between 80 and maybe not 100 quite of positions that are vacant right now. And by the way, when you look at the past in Huntington Beach, that's not an enormous amount of vacancies. So as each one of those vacancies happen, it's evaluated, and then and it's evaluated. Is there some other way to do it? Is there an opportunity to change how that position works, and look at an efficiency to see how that would be done as each of those come through? And so as those come through right now, I don't know of any that have been requested to be replaced that have been on hold due to the 80 plus vacancies that we have in place.
Okay, so
Does that make sense?
I think so. So moving forward, about half of those vacancies you're planning on not being filled for that 40
Right,
number.
and realize this is moving all the time. So people retire the end of the year. A lot of people retire typically at the end of the year. So that's all things are often changing. This is when you have 1,000 employees, it's moving all the time. So we're evaluating that to manage that throughout the budget year.
Wonderful. Thank you for answering that.
All right, this is going to conclude the town hall for tonight. I just want to rest assured that we are working, and we are working hard throughout the whole city, everybody involved, that we're going to try to bring up our revenues where they should be reasonably and bring down the expenses. And I'm confident by the end of it all, I don't know if we'll have I don't think we'll have a deficit. It's kind of, I'm optimistic, but I believe we won't have a deficit at the end of this. So thank you for coming.